In today's episode, I'm joined by Vandana. Vandana is an exited healthcare founder with over 20 years experience in the sector. She has a patent in cervical screening, launched the world's first handheld ultrasound, the world's first at-home baby monitoring wearable, and now also sits on the board of a breast cancer charity. Her first startup was in oncology therapeutics, and the second one was in AI predictive cancer diagnostics. She has raised over £10 million across 2 rounds, backed by Accel Ventures, which is one of the world's top VCs. Vandana now works alongside founders and funds alike, helping them with their capital raising, growth, and exit strategies with her company, Rainmatter. Our podcast today is sponsored by Progeny Global, providing best-in-class fertility, pregnancy, postpartum, and menopause benefits for the modern global workforce. Check out the show notes for more information. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I have so many questions for you because you've achieved so many incredible things in your career. I'm really excited for this episode to unpack this all. But yeah, let's start with a little bit of an introduction and backstory, if that's okay for the listeners.
Pleasure to be here. I think you're doing some fantastic work in the women's health space, and always sort of wonderful to sort of put the word out there and help the founders of the ecosystem and how the sort of investing founder trajectory works. So about 22 years in healthcare, worked with large corps like Philips Healthcare. I've done two startups myself, exited them, and I now work in investing. I also am an alumnus of London Business School, and I stay very close to the private capital and mentorship story in the university ecosystem in London.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. You've obviously done, so many things in that list, but in particular, you've done a lot of incredible things over oncology and women's health in general. So please feel free to give us the slightly longer version of what some of those incredible achievements are.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually did not specifically think of women's health as a topic when I got into it 20 years ago. But it's sort of, I think they were repeating thematics about access, about the fact that this was a very not researched upon field, and there was a lot of requirements and funding issues, and that all sort of tied together to sort of form a story where I felt that as a woman in commercials and in a position to be able to build products and business lines, I felt the need to sort of push that thematic a bit more on the global stage. So to that end, I have helped launch one of the world's first handheld ultrasound, and again, this was very cool because it was even before the iPad was launched, so the form factor was very cool. It was a global launch, and the story behind that really was about how can I access a product at a cheaper price in a clinic versus a larger hospital at faster sort of checkout times, and that sort of motivates a patient to sort of come in much more often, right? A woman patient to come in much more often. So and then another product where one of the first, again as part of Philips, launching a fetal movement monitoring belt, and again at the time, if you look at how women really monitor their child's heartbeat and movements, it's just by touch and feel, and it's very sort of subjective, right? There's really nothing that says let's sort of make something serious out of what they're doing at home any which ways, and this was a product that sort of was the answer for how it gave a sort of a power in their hands that they can sit at home and actually look after the well-being of the baby in their way before they could go over to the doctors and hospitals. So that was one bit. And again, another interesting piece that I then sort of, followed was cervical cancer monitoring in a country. And again, I'm Indian. I come from a country that's, there's a lot of need for market access. There's a lot of need to educate. There's not enough money on the ground that's not private healthcare. And there's just so many cancer cases that just goes, undiagnosed. And I felt the need to sort of, put out these products and also drive large corps to actually shine the light on products that needed to land in the market, that were actually needed rather than a business play, if you will. So I think along that way, oncology is sort of starting to look very interesting for me. And I think that sort of also ties back a little bit into, just not just women's health, but a much broader piece where the incidences are so high across breast cancer, across, cervical cancer, across all the other cancers. And I think to sort of build that, and this has been sort of a passion spot for me, if you will, in oncology for the last 15 years. And I've built out multiple product lines in the US, in Europe, and really looking at what could be game changers in enabling that X% for a patient from what they receive now.
Yeah, brilliant. I'd love to unpack that a little bit more, actually. That's really interesting. So going back about 15 years, I didn't actually realize it was that long ago when you said that in terms of some of those achievements. And what you mentioned there was along the lines of, it was about trying to convince Philips that actually this was the right thing to do, as well as maybe a good kind of commercial decision. I imagine 15 years ago, there was a lot less kind of talk around, women's health, right? And some of those conditions that affect women differently and disproportionately. So yeah, how did you kind of have that? How did you have that conversation? How did you open that up with them?
So I think the world was moving, and absolutely, right. Women's health was not a topic about, maybe about 5, 6, 7 years ago. The light has not been shone on categorically so, but definitely on the radar with where oncology has been going, both from a drugs and from a medtech perspective as well, right? And then again, the health tech piece sort of came in just to look at, how could you do maintenance of oncology and preventative and so on and so forth. And to that end, right, it was about a lot of investors heavily investing in oncology and a lot of medical device manufacturers working in tandem with the Cedars-Sinai or the Mayo Clinic, top hospitals in the US. And that's sort of then coming into different markets as, could you then build these innovation pieces for us? That sort of, set me thinking that, I'm in a country where you actually don't have those solutions at all. We have great science, but we really don't have let's say the monetary making machines of the affordability and so on. So that's sort of, those are two pieces that sort of stepped into play. And then, it became a handshake in how different markets could then be enabled with these, products. And that's basically how I fell into it. Now, just to, the two companies that I then founded eventually down the line, also in oncology, right? And the first one was, and again, I think it's a little bit about how there's so many different cancer types, there's so many different stages of survivability or not, and really looking at how do you get data sets, large data sets, custom data sets to be able to provide better sort of solutions, both by way of medicines or by way of, just tech solutions that can help you along the way. And I kid you not, I have spent a lot of hours sitting in hospitals next to oncology patients where, they have really been going through treatments and I can see their pain. And that also propels you into seeing how can you sort of make a corporation, or how can you then build out your own products? And I think partially that's what moved me from the large corporate life into founding my own businesses as well, is can I then do a product or a solution that runs 25% faster than what a large corporation can do in terms of bringing out products.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you for that. What you just said there, that was really interesting. You were literally in kind of hospitals, like chatting with oncology patients. If you don't mind me asking, was that from like a market research standpoint, or because obviously you hear a lot as a founder, like build closely with your users, right? Like spend a lot of time with them. So I'd love to kind of hear you elaborate on that.
So two bits, right? So when obviously you're building large, go-to-market strategies for large corps, or as a founder, you're building out these, these drugs or product lines, what happens really is, one is you're on the ground with clinicians, trying to understand what the need gaps are, trying to understand how do you price a particular product. So that sort of put me on the ground. And then once your product is ready, then you're sitting in your, patient rooms, where you're looking at, and again, patients play a big role in saying, this is what the doctor has told me to do, but is there anything better, right? And these are multiple, you have protocols already in place in different countries, but there's always room when you're innovating a new product for a patient voice. And that's what makes for a more, is there a need in the market versus let me push it down? So I think that, as well as when your product is then ready and you're doing your revenues and you're earning your revenues, you are, sitting in waiting rooms, waiting for your, hospital sort of adopt your product. So spend a lot of time with patients that way.
Thank you for sharing that. The reason I really wanted to actually explore that and hear your thoughts on that was I feel like we've kind of almost got too comfortable with having access to people online. And what I mean by that is I've seen a little bit of like the death of the Google form. We had this conversation in the WhatsApp community a few months ago where I was actually seeing, even with like my own forms and my own asks of people from like a market research or survey standpoint, I just wasn't getting anything. And then so I started messaging some of the people that would post survey or market research related things into the WhatsApp chat and saying, hey, just out of interest, like, are you really getting any engagement on these? And they kind of kept coming back to me and saying like, no. And what I kind of take from that is ultimately, I think we've all got quite comfortable with like just feeling like, oh, I can throw something out online, people will complete it, I can ask them, questions online, right? Rather than actually going into real world environments and chatting with potential users or customers. I think there's a lot of almost like Google form fatigue, maybe, people are like, why am I filling out this survey? What am I getting from it? Where is this feedback going? How does it help this company or how does it help this startup? So yeah, the fact that you were literally in there chatting to so many people, I just think that's a really important takeaway.
No, also I think, even now, so I also sit on one of UK's largest breast cancer charity foundations, and just the other day, right, and again, the consortium is made up of breast cancer survivors, and to be able to sit in the room and listen to, their stories is a very, it's an experience like none other, because, it's about, sort of the, how you suffer through it, but also how you've come out on the other side. It's very inspiring to sort of see, what can I sort of build that could aid in that process. And it's a very personal story, right? And unless and until, you have that time spent with patients, understanding what their real pain points are, I don't think you can build, a fantastic product, because I think it's less about, hey, look, I've thought about this great tech. I know there's a need in the market. Let me now build something towards it. Healthcare is just such a specific sector because you're solving for people. It's less about solving for convenience in most of the cases. So you need to have those personal touch points for the market you're serving.
Yeah, brilliant. The conclusion I kind of take from that, and this is what I shared in the WhatsApp chat, is that need to try and get in front of people, which is what you've just kind of said there about hearing those stories. I know I've already asked you a couple questions that we hadn't run through beforehand, so I apologize, but I'm thinking of so many new ones now we're chatting. Have you got any tips for founders who are quite early in their journey? They maybe can't afford to pay for like large scale kind of advocacy groups and set up like user interviews that way, but it would be beneficial for them to be in those in-person environments where they're engaging with potential users and kind of hearing their stories. Any tips for founders to navigate that?
I think, you should, I think London, the UK ecosystem is very well set up for network building, right? It's fantastic. It's probably one of the most networked for founders spaces, possibly after the US, but it's absolutely brilliant, the stage that it sets. Now, I think, if you are able to get those early tie-ins with the NHS or, or if you're able to sort of work with market research agencies where they actually conduct those patient and if you have a few sort of marketing pounds to spend into before you do that MVP, I would suggest that get into sort of, getting that target market in and spending some time with patients and really understanding the needs while you shape up the product, because that story is very important to get out to a VC rather than an inward out sort of, a build, if you will.
That makes a lot of sense. Would you say, so something I've been thinking about a lot recently is obviously, community, right? And I think historically when I've been learning about, the startup space and the VC space, often these groups or these user interviews are maybe kind of siloed, right? You maybe conduct them in isolation or, they're not part of something larger with like a continuous thread. But what we're seeing now is the rise of communities as being part of startups, right? Because it's obviously part of the go-to-market strategy. It's something that's kind of defensible, like those people buy into you and they like you as a founder. And I think we're about to enter a very interesting period from an AI standpoint, aren't we? The head of product at X tweeted, it's not called tweet anymore, is it? But tweeted a couple of days ago about how in 6 to 9 months, there'll be so much spam in some of our channels that they'll just become unusable. And I think that makes the power of a closed private community even more important. So do you potentially see some scope for those things to marry up a little bit, where this user feedback, learning stories, chatting to potential customers can kind of have more of an ongoing journey and community feel to it? Or do those still feel like two very separate things to you from a health standpoint?
No, I think it's a very interesting point that you make, right? Because AI does dilute a lot of those early stage narratives, if you will, right? Because you do need those personal touch points when in healthcare. And I think while it can aid in efficiencies of what an outcome could be out of that particular sort of set of inputs that then goes into build, I think it does sort of come into diluting it. Now, I haven't quite thought about whether it could play a part in the initial set of, sort of the patient advocacies and touch points with AI. I don't see it marrying just yet, maybe in the next 6 to 9 months, but it could be interesting to see where that sort of comes up. Maybe from a strategic perspective, corporates that can come in and help with that process with patients that they already sell to, for example, could be interesting to see how that sort of pans out for founders.
Amazing. One of the things I asked our WhatsApp chat if they'd like a webinar on was like how to build a community specifically at the intersection of like from a health journey standpoint, because obviously the majority of our community and founders are trying to build in relatively specific verticals such as IVF, endometriosis, menopause. So potentially, depending on people's questions and feedback, we could have a follow-up conversation about that a little bit later this year, either on a panel or something.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's really interesting, but I also want to make sure we get to what I actually said I'd ask you. So sorry for going a bit off piece, but one thing that I think is a really interesting talking point at the moment is around the term Femtech and kind of women's health as a sector. Obviously, there is a lot of benefits to having a name and creating a movement and a mission around it. But at the same time, there's so many conditions that affect women differently and or disproportionately that we maybe don't view as women's health, right? And your experience, I think, means that you're very well placed to probably have some thoughts on that. So yeah, how do you view those terms? What are the pros and cons?
Yeah, so I have to be a little controversial in saying that I'm not a fan of the Femtech caging, if you will, right? Because I think while Femtech played a brilliant part in sort of getting the message across that there does need to be, I think, less than 5% of investing dollars goes into the women's health and Femtech investments, and I think it's a bit of it's how it sort of played out really is Femtech sort of played a great part in saying that shine the light on this particular sector so that everyone looks at it. Now, what has happened now though is it's largely the view from outside in really is now it's fertility, it's defined by lifestyle apps. It's not considered serious enough, and I think it's sort of a bit like shooting yourself in the foot, I feel like, almost, right? Where I think it played for a great way to sort of open the gates for it, but I think it's reached its ceiling where Femtech is much more than just those few bits that I mentioned. It's more about, you could have women's health and Femtech within oncology, you could have it within the healthcare AI infrastructure play. It's just much broader. It's so, for example, when I am solving for a product in cancer care or predicting cancer, you're still playing to a women's health piece, and that in turn also opens up then the VC dollars as well. And it's not one way or the other. I think it's sort of hit that wall where it's messaging versus how tangibly is it getting funded. And I think it's time to sort of move on from that piece and really sort of broad base yourself into saying that we're a serious category, right? I mean, we are a serious category. It's just don't box yourself in.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's also a lot of things that don't fall into it from like a tech perspective, right? So for example, period products.
Yeah.
If you're going to, be able to diagnose something as they're looking at via a period product, is that tech? There's obviously a very large tech component, but maybe the tech part of Femtech also sells some of the amazing innovations short.
Yep.
What are your 2026 and beyond predictions for like how that terminology and references to the sector plays out? Or is that a bit of a tough question to answer?
It's an absolute tough question because, I think I see such fantastic founders and products sort of playing out in this space. And it's amazing to see the passion behind these founders, right? It's a whole movement, and especially in the UK. And it's fantastic to see that. But I do think that, and I do think there's two ways of looking at it. I think the movement has caught a lot of attention with VCs, investors, in various parts of the world. So it's definitely interesting to see how that sort of plays out in 2026. But having said that, I think, more sort of comprehensive. I'm also seeing a lot of comprehensive plays coming out, not just, let's say, a period product, just as a single product, or do you sort of then play to a B2B versus a B2C sort of a sales play as well, right? So, and obviously, again, B2C really is a tricky space when it gets to funding. So when you say B2C and then you do, you're sort of bracketing back into Femtech, it's a very small sliver. So I think we do need to see how can we strategically look at larger B2B, plays and larger sort of, investor choices, if you will.
Yeah, I find that very interesting because obviously from my own founder journey, we got so much advice about go B2B first. It's a little bit easier to get letters of intent, get about early traction, maybe even generate revenue, et cetera, et cetera. And I always felt like B2B SaaS and how you view that and Femtech, it felt like it was very hard to kind of connect some of those narratives and strategies.
I think there's a logic in why B2B sort of, is looked at as it's less about, how easy it is. In B2B, you actually have really clear exit points. In B2C, you just end up spending so much marketing dollars. And also the stickiness of patients returning is very up in the air. So these are very risky bets for investors. And it's whereas B2B, you actually are able to do those partnership. It's far less. It's much safer when you build out those metrics for yourself as you sort of scale. It's you're able to see your pharmaceutical partnerships or your medtech or hospitals that are signing on, and that makes for very clear pathways into how you sell a product rather than something that you're really trying to. It's alleviating a consumer pain in a certain way versus what actually sticks long term, and that's sort of the cusp where your investors sort of grapple with. Having said that, you have several consumer centric VCs as well. Naturalexis is one. I know of a few others, but it's really about how you want to sort of de-risk your product or line as a founder.
Yeah. Ahana, I believe, right?
Yeah.
She had some great answers on how she did that with Clear, and we're going to speak a lot more about that on the 5th of March panel, which I'm excited for. So I think so it's a really important conversation. And in hindsight, I probably would have gone about that a little bit differently. So yeah, keen to try and get that conversation out for people. That was all really, really useful. Thank you. So we spoke beforehand about there maybe being kind of 3 areas in particular that you see founders fall a little bit short with when they're trying to fundraise, in particular kind of moving towards Series A. So I would absolutely love to work through those.
There's actually possibly more than 3, but let's see if I can pick out the top 3 and sort of see how that sort of helps founders. So again, I've founded 2 companies, exited them, and I sit now on the investing side of things. So I have an inside out and an outside in view, if you will. And I hope that sort of helps founders along their journeys. But possibly the first one is, sort of overplaying your growth matrices at the early stages, because I think healthcare can be, it's a very regulated play. You do need to sort of show, your regulatory, how you're sort of speaking for regulatory outcomes, where you need, and these are large spends in the early days, as well as, if you do need sort of clinical proof points, LOIs with, again on the back of B2B discussions, right? And these are very difficult to sort of get in place as a first-time founder, for example, or someone who's not had, let's say, deal experience in with the B2B markets. They can take anywhere between 3 months to a year to say, yes, I'm convinced that your product is going to deliver X value for me in my legacy large organization, because these are billion-dollar firms, and you do need to sort of have that differentiated play to be able to sort of even break in. And not just the differentiated play, you actually need to have connects to be able to enter these markets, right? So that's a very, and I think you need to be able to have those bits in play before you can sort of, get out and say, I'm going to scale XYZ. It's great when you come in and say, I see this is the market for me, and these are, and that you need at the first raise. But then you also need to sort of, make sure that you have the regulatories and the clinicals sort of in place as proof points. So that's one. The second, I would say, really is raising low. And I think a lot of founders, I think they're worried about equity, partying with equity, diluting early on. But with healthcare, it's smarter to sort of raise, if you can, and you have the means to do it, and the founders are investors are interested. I would say raise a little bit more in your your earlier rounds, because for the same reason that I said in the first point, because you do need solid clinical proof points to be able to go to the next stage. So you might die if you actually don't raise enough. And that's just the reality of how this sector works, right? So that's one thing. And then the third point I would say is fantastic. I've seen founders, PhDs, fantastic, tier 1 universities or tier 2 universities come out with brilliant, innovative innovations, tech, particle innovation even. But I think there's a lot of, think more in systems rather than in product, because I think it's very easy for a scientist to fall in love with their science, as someone just recently told me. It's you need to see what the actual why is there a need for your company or your product? Why is there? Who is going to pay at the end of the day, right? I mean, it's you need to think about the larger systems play versus how good is my product? How many features do I have on my product?
There's a few questions that come to mind from that for me, and one of which is this. I feel like it's always a bit of a balancing act, right? You have to almost have an internal version of your narrative as a company, and maybe that's sometimes slightly different when you're fundraising. And one thing that comes to mind from the first point you said around kind of growth metrics versus making sure there's the right foundation, maybe, if that's an okay way of summarizing it, is how do you speak to VCs about that? Because obviously VCs are like, okay, our fund is X amount of hundreds of millions, so we need your total addressable market to be this in order for you to exit for this, for us, right? Don't need to explain the maths to anyone listening. And that for me always felt like when I was chatting to VCs, and I had 110 VC meetings roughly, I always felt like that there was a little bit of a contradiction there between that advice around build for one, narrow problem, solve for one pain point first, find that product market fit, obviously make sure you have the relevant regulation and or clinical trials if that's necessary, but then versus like, oh, but we also need you to achieve an exit worth a few hundred million, if not billions, if not hundreds of billions, and we need you to do it in the next 7 to 9 years. Like, do you know what I mean? That seems like quite far apart from each other. So do you have any thoughts on that in terms of like the actual strategy, but also maybe the narrative from like an internal and a fundraise perspective?
Yeah, so there are two things that VCs are looking at or investors are looking at when they're approaching your product, right? And it is that is this founding team, and especially at the earlier stages of pre-seed and so on, you are investing in a founder more than what you are saying on your presentation, because it is who you are, who can you actually safely build this product out for me, or not safely as well, right? Because you've got those sort of those products that could be moonshots as well. But then I think what they want to see is the vision. And you do have to show the vision. You do have to show your $100 million plus. And these are my scaling markets and so on, building for the UK, building for the US, whatever it is. So you do have to show that. But I think what they're also then looking for is, can this founder then focus and get me revenues in the next 3 years? And what is the most optimal route for it, right? So you do need to know as a founder in your own mind that I know that this can scale to $1 billion. But I also know that these are the tangible parts that's going to then give me the $1 billion, right? Because you're not going to be out of the gates and tell me that I'm going to give you $1 billion in 3 years' time, right? That's simply not happening. So it's really about and I think in a way it also gives the founder and the team focus on the areas that they need to be solving for first, and then slowly building out other sort of product lines or however you want to reach your $1 billion.
I think it's an underrated trait that I don't hear being talked about that often, is that founders need to be able to very obsessively zoom in, and the details matter, the 1% and all of those kind of phrases, while simultaneously needing to kind of hold space for this, bigger term vision, right? I think it takes a pretty special kind of person to actually be able to do both of those things, because they're quite different.
Yeah, I think some can, but it's a very small percentage. I would say don't beat yourself up about being able to do everything. I'm someone, and again, I think this speaks to my background, right? Because I've worked in very structured organizations, which led to a lot of discipline in the way I organized outputs. And I think it's important for you to not beat yourself up a little about being able to do everything because you are a founder. I think you should have a team that is able to handle different spokes of your of your company efficiently, and I think that's the right way. That's a long game strategy, if you will, rather than sort of saying oh my god, I love my product, I would love to sort of solve for everything, but the burnout is very real because the competition is very real and the market is moving at a very rapid click.
Yeah, no, that's really great advice. If I look at the periods of time where I've been really burnt out over the last 3 years on this journey, it was often when thinking too big a picture and trying to do too much, because you subsequently don't have that feedback loop of, I've done something, there was an output, and I've got some sort of reward and benefit from it, right? Which I think really helps in terms of managing burnout.
And I think an important thing is a lot of times founders tend to micromanage their teams as they grow, because it is at the end of the day your baby and you want to sort of see the best outcomes for it, but it may not necessarily be the right strategy for you to look at it from the vision of stepping back and saying, but I want to see my company grow. And that's very important as you grow up the investment stages as well.
Let's talk a little bit about team, if that's okay, because we touched on that before the episode. So again, majority of founders listening are probably early in their fundraise journey. They maybe raised a small amount of capital or about to raise their first capital, maybe up to hundreds of thousands. Even when you've raised a few 100K, you probably aren't building out, a full team. I've got a few friends that have raised around the $1 million mark. There's still only 2 or 3 of them in the company. So in terms of going from that 0 to 1, you can't do everything as a founder, which we've touched on, and the importance of team. So yeah, what are some tips on how do you find those people? How do you maybe get them to work for, fractional roles or, for equity? Or what would your advice be?
No, I think it's very important that your team sort of gets stitched together, especially as you grow from pre-seed, seed, and beyond. Because I think once the momentum picks up, it picks up quite quickly. And I think between the build and between how can you delegate, it can get very murky. I think the fractional play is a very interesting one in a market where you have grant money, for example, or a few 100K, and you need to sort of really get some market experts who can open doors for you, even with LOIs, right? Even for conducting your MVP, you do need sort of industry experts to be able to come in and open those pharmaceutical or device doors for you. So get those sort of senior people in. Definitely get a strong advisory board, a global one if able, and take your time in getting that advisory board in terms of what value someone is bringing in. It could be, is it someone who has deep connects in the hospital space? Is it someone who has deep connects in investment, in co-investors in the US or in some other market? Because you're already raising from here. So have a little bit of a 10-year think when you're, a 5-year think when you're building that stability in for yourself. And also, I think when you have investors coming in, for example, I get very happy when I see an advisory board that's actually comes from very solid lineage. And I always like to, let's say, look at the founder a little bit more closely when they have an advisory board that really can walk the talk, if you will, right? More than the product that you're building. I think that makes for a very compelling case to invest in. And with your own team, I am not someone who believes, less believe, but I would advise that have more than one founder, because I think it makes for great pushbacks between each of you, because you can, again, like I said, fall in love with your idea you may not be able to see your own blind spots. And I think having a co-founder really helps with keeping things in check and balance. Having said that, please have a co-founder that you've known for many, many, many years and understand where they want to go with the company. And it's not, let's say, it has to, give room to sort of understand your aspirations and their aspirations. Make sure you're on the same table because, burning out with a co-founder is possibly one of the worst ways you can spend your time. It just pulls the entire company down, the morale of the company down. VCs don't like it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great advice. I've got a few thoughts on that again from our own experience and often hearing advice that maybe at first glance kind of seems contradictory, but I never really got that much out of some of the fractional people that we worked with, albeit that was probably my own inability to know what to ask and how to extract value. But then the flip side of that, as you just said about co-founders, was they are the people that for me, and that at one point there was 4 of us, like that was when we were making really, really great progress because no one will care about it as much as if when they're a co-founder, right? And fractional people are massively constrained by having a day a week or whatever that might be. I had 3 absolutely incredible co-founders, Kish, Claire and Kerry, amazing people personally and professionally. Didn't know any of them for years beforehand, actually, which is interesting. But I do think that is obviously great advice, right? Because co-founder breakups are the leading cause of startups not working. It wasn't why ours didn't work. So there's probably a lot of luck involved in why I was able to find great people that I got on with so well, despite not knowing them for years beforehand. But yeah, just to offer a slightly different perspective, I actually didn't know mine necessarily before, but that is also the benefit of like personal brand and community, was that's kind of how I found them. And I think that having a bit of a personal brand and a community and doing events, etc., one, it kind of makes it quite easy to quantify mini projects, but 2, it means you are sharing your values and your philosophy and your mission with the world, which then probably makes it easier for the right people to kind of, resonate with that story and come on board.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting sort of it's especially because you have a lot of folks out of universities here that are building, right? In the UK especially, and you don't necessarily find a sparring partner. So you might have 2 great tech founders, and then you don't have, an operational or a commercial co-founder that you chance upon because you're simply not in the university that offers that sort of pairing. But so again, I sit on in the London Business School entrepreneurship committee, so I see a lot of these pairing events between the commercials, so the LSEs and the LBSs of the world, with the Cambridges and the Oxford, and that's where that sort of marriage happens between the commercial and the tech, because each offers the other some complementary skill sets. But definitely sort of spend some time, even while, again, if you've not known this person personally for 100 years, still spend some time, a few months, 5, 6, 7 months, understanding if you're able to pull a company together in the same direction, rather than, or if you're not able to, it's always great to have sparring viewpoints, right? As long as it's something that's adding to the problem point rather than splitting it wide open.
Yeah, it's such great advice for sure. I think I'm someone that didn't go to an LSE or an Oxford or a Cambridge. I mean, I didn't actually go to university at all, but let alone a top one. So I have some incredible friends. If any of them are listening, this isn't me saying I don't have absolutely incredible friends that are doing amazing things, none of whom were going to be a medical or technical co-founder for a women's health tech company. So I didn't really have that ability to meet them at university or have those university style kind of like networking events. But yeah, there was loads of great things in there. One other question I had for you on that was, you mentioned about a global advisory board. And I felt like that was really interesting because, again, if I just look back on my own journey and some of the mistakes I made and chatting to other founders, it is maybe, are we skipping ahead a bit much and thinking about things that need to be done in the future or where the company's going to go versus actually just solving one really core problem in the here and now and the benefits that come with that essential focus. So the fact that you said a global advisory board from, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but day one or early, you said, I'd love to sort of elaborate on that a little bit more. Like, how early is too early? How do you view that being potentially a distraction versus nailing that initial core market? Do VCs view that as a good thing, like you're forward thinking, or do they think that you're skipping ahead and actually have not focused too much on the primary target?
It's a great question. And I think I think a few viewpoints there, right? I think when you're building in your very early stages, pre-seed and so on, I don't think anyone is expecting you to have this stellar advisory board. It can be just from, the ecosystem you're building for, or a global one, right? And you keep adding those pieces in. But I think two ways of looking at it. A smashing advisor is possibly going to come on your board only if you're already anyway relevantly building something, or if you've had a relationship with them from before. And I think the important thing is, even with events that you pull together, and the sort of amazing community you're building together in the ecosystem, is where the founders get chances to meet these people. So for example, when I'm at one of your events, right, I keep getting approached with what I can then do for you, let's say from an oncology perspective, or from a founder plus investor sort of insight, right? This is where you meet. And it's important to have those networks, that person in mind, and say, hey, and oftentimes, advisors are not looking to come in for a retainer or so on. A lot of them are happy to just support you, because they like what you're building. They're just so senior that they're done with their own journeys and they're looking to see what I can give back. And you can structure that out over a period of time, or when you feel, and again, VC feedback is important. And when you go pitch and you have a VC that says, oh, but I don't see a great team here. And this is especially true because if you're a very lean team in the early days, it looks very well supported when you have an advisory team that then is able to lend its credentials to you, versus, let's say you have a 10-member team already and you're building something brilliant, and investors will focus less so on, do you actually need those advisors? But then again, it's also, what are the advisors solving for you, right? Is it the same thing? It's about what functional purpose are they then, doing for you as a company? Is it introductions to more investors? Is it opening a door for you? And you can do that with an advisory board instead of when you don't have the funds, the cash, or the to be able to pay a fractional, or to be able to have a full-time person on board.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. One thing you hear a lot is that often founders will just kind of slap a bunch of advisors on a deck that, I'm not saying they haven't asked permission, but it's like, what is that person really doing for you? And one great little tip I heard was, rather than listing off their bullet points on your deck as X Google and X this, it's like actually write what they're doing in those couple of bullet points for you. Have you got any other tips for founders to make sure that they actually are able to extract value from their advisory board and communicate what that value is to investors, rather than potentially the investor just assuming there's some great people slapped on the deck, but they're not actually doing anything for this company?
No, it's absolutely, it's a fantastic question. Again, there, it's important that you don't end up having this, well labeled, it becomes a bit, of an overhead to then manage over a period of time, right? It's the same with fractionals. It's about actually, I think when you have that conversation with them, with advisors or boards, make sure that you're able to say that, and it is as a founder for you to be able to chase that and say, look, if I am signing on this sort of very beefy board, then I should be, keeping aside a month, an hour a month, and actually have targeted outputs and outcomes from this board for myself. It's less about the decorative element of it, of just fundraise, but really about and again, they need to stay engaged as well. And if your company is just, it's, hey, I signed up with these 5 amazing people, and then I have nothing much for you, they'll not have much interest going forward as well. So it's a very, the founder does have to sort of justify that they, have these people on board and follow through with that as well.
Yeah, that's such great advice. I'm really glad you brought up kind of the management side of things. So again, if I just think back to my own journey, the amount of time I spend trying to kind of manage people, bring people together, and do so many things that in hindsight, if I'd allocated those 2 days a week to revenue generating, and I had just continued to do that via working with female clients as a nutritionist and put that into the company, we would have been generating a few K a month in revenue, which actually probably would have been significantly better, because that's why the company folded in the end. So I do think that's a really interesting point there around what benefits are you getting versus the decision fatigue and management time of having those people. One more little question on that, if that's all right, is around the amount of equity for advisors. And I know this is one of those questions where it's like, how long is a bit of string? But when I chat to a lot of founders, I'm like, whoa, you're talking about quite high equity numbers for for advisors. And also they're often not putting them in cliff periods or vesting schemes, which, I think are really important. They're not attaching them to clear deliverables. So I think looking at the Carter data and subsequently how I made a lot of my decisions, a lot of our advisors were in the 0.15 to 0.3% of equity. And again, that's going to be hugely dependent on what are they bringing to the table, how much are your shares actually worth, because obviously I've just quoted a percentage. So I know that it's a little bit of a tough question to answer, but yeah, I see so many founders that I chat to and they're like, oh yeah, this advisor has 1%. And I'm like, 1% is a lot more than it sounds. It sounds like a small number, right? 1%, but it's really not. So any tips, advice or frameworks on equity and structural, like the structure of giving that equity to advisors?
So it's a mix of what you have in-house. So let's say I have a CCO already with me, and then I say, hey, you know what? I have someone who knows how to sort of scale markets in XYZ countries. But then, for me to actually bring this amount of revenues, I need someone in a different market to then come on board and help me with this sort of piece of strategy, right? And it really depends on what need you have of that particular advisor versus what you have in-house and what your own internal deliverables are to be able to then piecemeal the equity. And again, equity sits on a cap table forever. So you need to really be, and again, I would say that, if I have 5 advisors on my company and each one of them is asking for 1%, I would walk away. And I think, I think in a world where, enough advisors, well, at least the ones who have seen 25 years or 20 years of industry experience would know that it's a hard ask. It's it's just something that you possibly cannot part with, especially in early stages as well, right? So it is a balance between what's fair, what value you want out of this advisor. And if you can think of, a person who can instead have a full-time role in the company and you think you're going to grow with that, that's sort of a balance and mix that you need to sort of bring in and be willing to walk away if you think that it's just out of ballpark for you.
Yeah, I think the right advisor typically, as you've said, is someone that's, had quite a successful career and they're taking the equity because, they want to have something for their time, right? And it's the right way of going about things. But really, they're probably someone that would give you a bit of their time per month to advise for nothing, right? Because whilst we need to view equity as something that is worth, real money, there's also quite a high probability that it will never be worth real money in the early stage, which means a lot of those early advisors that you're working with really would be doing it for free, right? They're not, the difference between 0.3 and 0.5% equity is probably not going to make someone walk away because they already personally like you and believe in your mission. Otherwise, they wouldn't be interested in being an advisor in that early stage.
A different sort of hat to also look at it from the advisor side of things is you would not know the amount of founders I advise for free in a year. It's a lot of people, especially because I sit in an educational community as well, and I'm building out, the company that I'm building, which is a venture platform, which does both the operational and investing side of things, which means that I'm always open to advice. But then I think if it's a long-term sort of, you are trying to keep aside, a portion of your time and an interest, I think, a commitment, if you will, right? And if you need to be committed to the growth of a company, then I think from an advisor side of things, they look, I cannot have 1,000 founders that I believe and want to back, but I need to see that there's something coming in it for me as well. So it's definitely a balance that you need to strike both as a founder, but also looking at it from the other side of things, because at the end of the day, it's business.
Yeah, of course. I think it sets the right precedent. I would want someone to help me and be unpaid for it. An ad hoc conversation's different, but if we're going to have more of an aligned, and we've talked about that, the importance of it being, okay, and what are we actually looking to get out of this? Let's set some objectives. Then I would want someone
absolutely
for nothing. So that makes sense. Let's talk about the investment side of it. You said something really interesting to me, which was that you're seeing a bit of a shift away from it being a pure financial sector in terms of people's backgrounds and experience into more exited founders and operators. So I would love for you to just kind of elaborate on how you see that at the moment, and then maybe we can talk about what are some of the implications of that shift.
Yeah, so I think the world is going through something interesting, which is that the startups are increasing in volume and innovations. You can see a lot of founders really saying no to corporate jobs and actually just wanting to found, and which is brilliant. But alongside that, you also see the frustration of founders where they're trying to explain. So you have the specialist funds, and again, my own story is that, when you have a brand like, so I was obviously, one of the Accel Partners was one of our, funded by them, one of the biggest names, was absolutely brilliant to have them on board. They opened a lot of doors for us with co-investors and so on. But it can also get very frustrating when they are generalists and you actually are looking for advice along the way on, hey, are we thinking, again, on the system side of things, are we thinking from a global state side of things? What can you give us, let's say, from a very sector-specific, door opener or just advice or strategy? And you can be stuck a little bit when, you don't have, a sector specialist, for example, right? And now time has grown where there's a lot of really good, amazing sector specialist funds in this particular ecosystem, as well as the Boston and San Francisco as well, which is, brilliant for the whole healthcare growth of things. The other interesting trajectory that I firmly sort of stand by and vouch for is really sort of, moving away from just pure financial experts who make up for the bulk of, VCs today, who are typically investment banking, backgrounds and have to look at, sort of how is your portfolio risk proof, how are the exits looking, and so on and so forth. And it's not a blanket sort of observation, but I think especially in this sector, or for any of the sectors, I guess, it's you are looking for someone on the other side of the table, who understands my pain points. And I think to move away from pure play, top down financial sort of investments into funds that are run by operators or exited founders or founders who understand these points. And again, you see about 8% of now fund managers having moved towards. That's a very small piece. But having said that, and the bulk of it is in the US, right? So I think it makes for some on both sides. I think with investing, when you understand what's on the other side versus a founder also being able to sort of show you, clearly that these are my pain points, and I actually would like someone on the other side who's investing in me to understand that. And also along the way, right? It's not just about investment; it's about, can you open a partnership door for me along the way? Because you've seen so much in your own journey in the industry of growing businesses or products, or, you've had founding experience. You're able to add just so much more value in the investment than it being just a pure play financial investor. And I think that makes for an amazing trajectory into the whole sort of innovation world of things, investing in innovation world of things. Be very exciting to see where that sort of goes in the next 2 to 3 years, I think.
If you're a founder listening and you're pitching to VCs, is there any difference to strategy or narrative that you'd recommend they be aware of if that VC is a exited founder versus coming from a financial background?
Well, I think, before you go to a VC, in any case, I have seen so many founders just, spraying and praying, right? It's just a waste of time when you're say you pitch to a B2C VC rather than a B2B company, and then, they don't really look at consumer health, et cetera, et cetera. So there's already one level of, sort of slicing and dicing there in terms of how you need to be approaching, VCs. Now, to your question on how would I position myself differently with, somebody who's a founder investor versus just, so I would, well, look, I mean, I think there is a certain empathy that, someone who's an exited founder can see. So you can be a little bit more transparent with your challenges and look to see if they actually have guidance on where they see your product or just your runway going, versus, let's say, a VC, which is a little bit more financial metrics oriented, which is a little bit more proof point based, right? It's about, do you have XYZ LOIs already so that I can trust in you to then see this growing a certain way. And again, it's very not blanket statements. There are a lot of VCs that then bring in operators. So, for example, Khosla Ventures has an entire operating partner line as well, apart from your GPs, who then understand your products a little more deeper than, let's say, just on the financial metrics side. It's a sophisticated market now, right? So it's just about it's a different side of lens coming in from an investing side of thing than, let's say, I mean, I think it's great. You've lucked out if you've got an operator or a founding investor on your team. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that was so insightful. I've honestly learned so much. So thank you so much for taking the time to share all of that. But just to finish off, where can people find out more about your new company? What is that? Where can they connect with you? And yeah, what would you like to share with the audience just to finish up?
So just launched Rainmatter, which is actually a venture platform, which is, what we work with both founders as well as and we are in the UK, Europe ecosystem as well as the US. And what we really do is, sort of solving for many of the problems that I've actually said, right? It's a lot of value creating, capital orchestration, looking at where we can come in. For example, if it's a later stage company, you're looking at M&A opportunities. We bring in those sort of M&A routes for you. If you're looking at exits and IPOs, we come in and structure those exits and IPOs for you. If you're an early stage company and you're looking at who can I get, investors are inundated with a bazillion deals a day, right? And I think you're looking at, can I work with a founder who I believe in, has some really strong roots in tech and commercial, and I would like to then sort of put them in front of, my network of investors, right? And also sort of opening up the door from pure play VCs, but really with my own angel and family office network and so on. We also invest in select companies, where we believe that, we've syndicated out and so on and so forth. Rainmatter obviously is, built to sort of, build out into a fund soon enough. And it's exciting time for us. We also, work closely with venture capital firms across the world, where we sit in as their preferred sort of partner for their own portfolio companies in where they can go to for operating, prongs instead of, so for example, if your company, and it's a lot of times when you build out as a company, you have the finances on board, but there are so many, nuances where you slip up in building out that company from stage to stage. And we come in as so, because, on our own sort of operating bench, if you will, we have, names from top consulting companies who will come in from a strategy and operating side of things. We have, names from some of the top VCs in the world who sort of want to throw their hat in and look at sort of quality founders that the platform then supports. So that's basically, Rainmatter. So you can find us. The website is pretty fleshed out. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm quite accessible there. And obviously, I'll be on Leo's events on and off. So there as well to sort of, help shape that platform out.
Thank you. You did a LinkedIn post explaining the choice of name, which I thought was interesting. I'd love for you to share that if you don't mind.
So when you are in the London ecosystem, I think you are pretty much working on a bunch of things, looking outside the window, which all of you, I'm sure, have done along your way. There's always rain pitter-pattering out there. So it sort of struck me that I'm in an ecosystem where it's something has to do with rain, so it comes in, but also just the philosophical way of looking at things really is it's about growing companies out, and it's a little bit looking at how it's sort of you're a sapling and you're growing it because of the rain that sort of falls on you, and that could be different things, right? It is it could be just an idea that we then grow out for you. It could be that you need the funds to grow yourself to the next stage, and we grow out for that for you. So it's really sort of different pieces that we want to help work with a founder or an investor, and also make in that matchmaking, if you will, right? Because there's just so much noise in the market. There's such passion in building our products that you often get lost in that chase. And I think Rainmatter sort of was put together in that context. And of course, it's London sort of played a big part in naming the firm that.
I love it. Beautiful dual reason on the name. The analogy makes sense, and it definitely rains a lot in London. So that I get it. Cool. Well, thank you so much for being here today. That was so insightful. It's always a privilege to learn from you. I've been able to learn from you in a few previous conversations. So to be able to give those kind of conversations access to more people is something I'm very grateful for. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a brilliant moderation.
Cool. Thank you.